Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome back to Modelling for Beginners. Building here the Airfix Mosquito PR16, and we're at the point, if you can't tell, of putting some decals on. Now, you may remember from the last episode that I did manage to damage the invasion stripes when I demasked everything. I've repaired that now. It isn't perfect. You can actually see where I've touched it up quite clearly because all I've done is used a fine brush and dropped the model. I've just used a fine brush and carefully painted in where the chip was. The reason I've done it that way is it is all but impossible, short of completely starting all over again and doing all the stripes again. It's really almost impossible to touch that sort of damage up with white. And because the paint was showing a tendency to come off, I didn't want to go through all that trouble, because before you know it you can end up repainting the whole thing. So it's just been touched in. The black areas obviously don't show, the white areas do a bit, but I'm not too worried. So on top of that, the model has been gloss coated. You can tell, you can see this is not a glass smooth ultra high gloss finish, and nor does it need to be. Okay, people will talk until they're black, blue and purple in the face about whether or not you need to gloss coat your model before decaling. The fact of the matter is, no, you don't. You absolutely can put decals onto a matte surface, but why would you, when it is, again, without any shadow of a doubt, easier to do onto a gloss surface. So a gloss surface is what we have, and as I say, this is not mirror polished supercar gloss. This is simply a hard, smooth surface, and that's what we need. I have here the instructions showing me the placement of the decals, the decal sheet itself, obviously, some scissors for cutting them out. Again, you can buy special scissors and special tweezers for decals. That is a product looking for an excuse. There is absolutely no need to use special scissors to cut the decals out, just some that will fit. I have in this extensively decaled jar some water. That's all it is, it's just plain water, nothing special about that. And in my anti-knock and over holder I have some Tamiya Mark Fit, and this I am going to use as a setting solution. As we go along, we'll see if the decals appear to need a solvent, because I would recommend to you that if your decals don't need a solvent, you do not use one, because there's always a risk of damaging your paint finish with these with decal solvents. Okay, so let's get started. It doesn't matter what decal you put on first, it never matters, but let's start with something nice and easy. Let's start with the underwing star and bar, which is decal number 33, of which there are two, so I am just going to cut that from the sheet. Nothing particularly spectacular about that. Keep the sheet to one side, preferably away from the water, because spillages can be very stressful otherwise. So this is just an old jar I picked up in Spain many years ago. I put water inside the jar and I used the lid for the decals to soak on. So I just rub that on my leg and get any dust off. Take the decal in my tweezers and dip it in my water. Nothing but water, and it's cold water. And then I'm just going to pop it on there. I'm not leaving it in the water, please don't do that. Pop it on the lid. This is a non-absorbent surface. Any non-absorbent surface is fine. The side of your cutting mat will work. A piece of glass, an old dish, a plate, something like that. Anything really that's non-absorbent will be fine. So whilst that is soaking, I'll take the Mark Fit. It does have a brush inside the lid, and I'm just going to paint some on the area where the decal is set to go. Thus, we'll see if this is ready to move yet. The answer to that is no. Okay, now the decal's free. That did take a little while to soak sufficiently to come through the backing paper. So I'll just refresh this area of mark fit, and make sure you've got the decal the right way up. Obviously with roundels there is no right way up, but with bars and stars there very much definitely is. And I'm just going to kind of stroke that through that setting solution to mix it all up again. Pop it into position roughly, and then with my tweezers I'm going to very gently move it around until I'm happy with the positioning. It may or may not match the diagram exactly, but as long as I'm happy with it, that's what matters. So I want that about there. Now take the cotton bud. Did not previously mention, but I have here a couple of cotton buds, and you need to moisten it. It doesn't need to be soaking wet, it just needs to be damp. I generally just put it in my mouth, but I realise that's a bit disgusting, so you might want to use a touch of water and then maybe dab off the excess on some tissue. So I'm going to use a rolling and pressing motion on this decal, starting from the middle, and of course it moves straight away. Let's get it set. There we go. Now just make sure the alignment is something like, because it will still move at the minute. Okay, and then gradually just work your way around, always working from the centre outwards, pressing gently and rolling, and what you're doing is expelling all of the water and setting agent from underneath this decal by pushing it down with this cotton bud. And once it starts to get stuck down, you can be a little less gentle with it until we get to the point where that is nicely pressed into the surface like so. Now, solvents, I don't think I'm going to need very much on this model because of it being so smooth, it being a mosquito. But I can see here this circular panel detail right in the leading edge here, that decal is showing no sign whatsoever of going into that detail at this point. And chances are, if it's not showing any signs of doing it now, it won't. So I'm going to choose a solvent. I have several to choose from. Mr. Mark Softer, Tamiya Mark Fit Strong, I've got Deco Products Decal Setting Solution, that's a very strong one. Tend to keep that for the really tricksy ones. I've got the VMS ones, Set and Fix and Softener. And I also have the Ammo of MIG ones. The Ammo of MIG ones are very, very strong, do be careful with those. So I think on this occasion, because I've not used them yet, I'm going to have a little go with the VMS. There we go. So this actually has a spout in it, but I don't want to use the spout, so I've taken that out. Now, let's take a paintbrush, any old paintbrush is fine. And pop the decal softening solution where I need it. I don't actually need it anywhere else, so I'm just going to put some there. Now you can tell when the softener is starting to take effect because the edge of the decal kind of looks a little bit ripply, as though it's sort of peeling a little bit, and at that point I'm going back in with my cotton bud. I'm doing the same thing again. I'm pressing this decal down into the detail, just encouraging it to conform to that panel line. because the softener has done exactly what it says on the tin. It's literally softened the decal to allow it to conform to the model, and hopefully you can see that it already now is starting to take that panel line on, and as it dries it should just sink down into that panel line detail nicely. And again, when the decal is ready to go, take the mark fit and pop it into the area where the decal is going to go. Grab the decal with the tweezers and lay it into that pool of setter that you just popped down. And again, using the placement diagram and your skill and judgment, just fiddle the decal into position until you're happy. You've got that nice cushion of water and setting solution there, so the decal should move fairly easily, but some don't. Do a little bit of testing if you're not sure, and just be careful, especially using tweezers to move the decal, because you can poke holes in them quite easily if you're not gentle. So I've got that where I want it. Again, just a light roll to start getting some of that moisture out, and then realign it again like so. And once that's starting to take hold, we can be a little bit less careful and just roll all that moisture out from underneath it. Now there is no panel line detail under this decal, so I don't feel the need to use any solvent on it at all, because it has taken on the raised detail beautifully. Straight away. And that really is all there is to it. I'm just going to work my way around the model, cutting out the relevant decals and applying them to match the drawings. And I'll come back and talk some more once they're all on. A little in progress update for you. I have hit a slightly tricky decal here with this right hand side fuselage marking. The reason for that is this reinforcement on the side here. So you've got this raised reinforcement bar that stops in the middle of the decal. Now it would be a bit of a pain even if it didn't stop in the middle of the decal, but the fact that it does makes it even worse, because we're having to ask the decal to stretch in every possible direction to enable it to conform to that surface detail. So I've been using the softener. I had 2 or 3 applications of softener, and I've got the decal in focus. I've got the decal in place, and I think you should be able to see that it's quite wrinkly and a little bit bubbly looking in places, and indeed there is a small tear right on the end of that piece of detail. And the reason I'm showing you this now while it's still wet is to show you that you don't need to panic when you see this kind of thing. Often with decals of this nature and surface detail of this nature, you will need to apply softener more than once, and you'll need to very, very carefully use your cotton bud to help the decal conform to all of that detail. So you're just sort of gently pushing and shoving to get it all lined up. The initial alignment of the decal is done by just actually getting the top part of it in place and sort of adhered down as best you can, so that it doesn't move too much while you're trying to get all of this to go into place. Airfix decals are very, very good actually for this kind of thing. It's quite difficult to get them to soften in the first place, but that does mean that they are a little bit more forgiving. Some decals, some very thin decals, if you use softener on them and try to move them about, you'll literally just stretch them and rip them and ruin them. So you do need to be very, very careful with things like this. But yeah, I wanted to show you it while it was still wet so you can see the sort of weird, the wrinkles and the creases and the sort of the little bubbles, and I'll show you it again once it's dry, to show how that will all kind of disappear as it does dry off. Now then, you join me a couple of hours after you were last with me, and here this decal is well on the way to being dry, and as you can see, that wrinkling and bubbling is much reduced already. As it dries, everything just shrinks and snuggles down onto the surface of the model, and all of that stuff that looks so bad when it's wet tends to level off quite nicely actually. But as I say, it is not completely dry yet, but it is well on the way. And it is a good idea to break up your decaling into blocks of time, because adding one decal and then going and doing another one straight away, you do run the risk of, whilst handling the model, just accidentally dislodging something you've already just fitted. And as a result of that, I basically did this side of the model in one session along with the first one that you saw me do, and then I've done this side of the model in a separate session one at a time and left that to dry again. And that's it for the major markings. They're very, very few on this particular scheme. So that means we're on to the stencils. Yay. I tire of stencils very quickly. There aren't that many actually on this model, and this is a very comprehensive suite of stencils, to be fair, for an aircraft of this vintage. But I'm not going to use them all. I've decided I find stencils to be quite distracting, honestly, especially in the smaller scales like this, and extra especially on a scheme which doesn't have a lot of other stuff going on, i.e. is one colour. As much as these, I do not doubt, are in scale, they seem to me to stand out far too much on a model compared to how they look on a real aircraft. And as I say, I find it a bit distracting. I don't enjoy putting them on. I don't particularly enjoy the way they look when they're on, so I don't always fit them all. In fact, I rarely fit them all. And the strategy I've chosen on this particular model, despite the relative lack of stencils, is to delete anything that's fitted over or on an area that's been refinished. So by that I mean where the tail has been painted red, where the invasion stripes are, the non-standard coloured spinners, things like that. I'm assuming for my own fun that the stencils were not reinstated after that work was done. It would be quite rare, in fact, for that to happen. So I've gone around the instructions and simply circled, I can't really tell if that's showing up, but I'm sure it is. I've circled the decals that I'm actually going to use, so I won't fit anything that I haven't circled, and I'm going to get on with that now. So when I fit major markings, one of the things I tend to do as I cut them out is I'll cut around them in such a way that I remove the decal number, because the decal number is also a decal. Sometimes it's a full one with backing sheet, as it is with backing film, as it is in this case. Other times they're just sort of floating numbers, but they will come off the sheet when you moisten the decal and you're waiting to fit it. These numbers will float off the backing paper, and sometimes they can get themselves tangled up in the bit that you're trying to apply, and they can be quite hard to get rid of again. If they get underneath it in particular, they can be quite awkward to get back off. So I'm quite I apply quite a lot of attention to cutting around the decals and not having the placement number still in situ. With stencils I don't do that, because if I don't do it, it means I can have more than one stencil decal soaking at one time without fear of not being able to remember which is which, because let's face it, they're not very easy to read, either on the instructions or on the sheet. So I will either stick to a small enough amount of stencils that I can remember which is which with my mind, or Can't speak whilst I'm concentrating, sorry. I will leave the actual decal number in place whilst the thing is soaking so that I can tell which is which. The other aspect, or the other strategy that I will employ is I'm starting with this left hand view, I'm looking at it, and I will apply all the decals I can see on that left hand view. For this model it's just the two, 13 and 22. There are actually 3 13s on the sheet, and I only need 1 at this point, so I've cut one out and I don't have the number on it, but because I'm only working with 2, I know which is which. And it's useful as well if there are multiples, see there's 13 there, to leave them in the sheet and leave the number next to them so you can see which way up they're supposed to go. As I say, most of them are not these are actually legible, but oftentimes they're not, so you can easily fit one upside down and not really know it until some smart aleck at the club or at a show points it out for you. So there we go, those are soaking. I've got my decal juices ready at the side here, and I do attack the application of stencils very slightly differently, and I'm just going to show you that to show you why. Yep, we're moving, okay, we're ready. So, as per normal, I'll put a small amount of my chosen setting solution in place, and we're just going to apply this one just near the wing root here. Then I'll grab hold of the decal in the same way and pop it where I have put my setting solution. In the same way as before, I'm just getting it aligned with the end of my tweezers. It's a little easier with the small decals like this because the surface tension is less, so they're slightly easier to move, and that's why I do things slightly different in the end stage. So I've got that in position. Now I'm just going to get my cotton bud as previously, but instead of trying to roll it across the thing, I'm just going to touch it. And I'm touching it just near the edges of the decal itself, and basically just holding it in position. And what is happening by doing that is the cotton bud is soaking up the excess fluids with capillary action. You may have noted when I was fitting the larger decals that there's a tendency for them to move initially when you start using that rolling motion. That is equally true of stencils, but they can very easily move a long way, or you can wind up with the stencil stuck on the cotton bud instead of the model. It really can be quite a magnificent pain in the posterior, so that's why I adopt this sort of slightly different technique just to get the thing seated, and once it's in position and snug down, then I'll use the rolling technique just to make sure any remaining fluid has gone. Just show you that again with the second one. I know that the shorter line of writing goes at the top. Pick it up and put it in that pool of setting solution, and then again utilise the tweezers just to line it up. There's quite a lot of fluid under this one, so it's almost floating actually on the surface here. Okay, that's got it in place, and again touch my cotton bud near it and let it grab that excess moisture just like that. Once it's snuggled, use the rolling method, and that's both of those decals in place without any trouble at all. The one further thing with stencils, we don't really have any on this sheet, but when you have walkway decals, the very thin lines, it really is worth trying to apply those without using any sort of setting solution, at least initially, because if you soften, it's quite hard to get those decals to lay down in a straight line as it is, and if you apply setting solutions that make the decal softer, it makes it even more difficult. And I've found over the years that once one gets a bend in it because of setting solutions, you really can't get it out very successfully. So with walkway lines and things like long straight decals of that nature, try and get it down and in position without setting solutions, and then apply a setting solution afterwards if you need to, just to avoid getting wobbly lines. Okay, so all the decals are on and they are dry. So the next stage, which I haven't filmed but I'll talk you through it now, is to use some Trizact. This is the piece I've been using. I cut the disc up, so this is what a full brand new Trizact disc looks like. It's a sort of a woven, almost like a fabric, with a very fine abrasive on it. Here it is from the back. So Trizact 3000. I use the 3000 grit. It is available in other grit levels, and as you can see, it's made by 3M. So you start with a disc like that. It's a 6-inch disc designed to be Velcro fitted to a sanding machine, a dual orbital sander. This is the disc I'm in the process of using. This is the older style printing on the back. Same product, older style printing. And I just cut chunks off, as you can see. They end up looking like this. And whenever you're going to use Trizact, always cut the backing off. This backing, you can see it's overlapping a bit here. It's quite a stiff sort of plastic type material. If you don't deal with it, cut the edge off or in some way mitigate it, you run a very, very high risk of damaging the surface of the model with the edge of the plastic when you're rubbing. So what I do is just use a simple pair of scissors and cut along the edge of the piece that I'm using. Get a new piece off to show you what I mean. So I've just cut a section off there. So I'll get my scissors, and at an angle, the precise angle is not important, but at an angle I cut a little bit of the foam and a little bit of that plastic backing away, so that the edge of my piece that I'm going to use is now quite heavily tapered. So if I place this edge now into a corner like that, I'm not going to hit the surface of the model with the edge of this Velcro backing, this plastic, like I would if I did that. It will damage the surfaces. Please, 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 either cut it at an angle like that or completely peel it off. It is possible sometimes, if you're careful, to completely peel the backing off. If you've got a new disc though, I suspect this will be quite difficult. So anyway, using your piece of Trizact, moisten it a little bit of water or whatever you want, and rub over the decals. I'm not kidding. Sand them like this. So everywhere you've added a decal, or for a little area around it, and depending on how smooth your surface is, you might want to do the whole model actually, but just give it a little rub. Don't sand it too hard. I don't want you to completely flatten it down, just a little rub, and what that will do is start to blend that decal into the surface of the model. So any high points, rough points, little niggly bits, it will knock them off, and it will start to taper the edge of that decal into the finish of the model. Now each area where there is a decal, I have done this. It's not necessarily that obvious because the abrasive is so fine you can't really see that you've sanded something. You can just see that the surface, you can maybe see just about that I've been sanding across that. Now this one that looked terrible before because of the wrinkles and the bubbles and everything else, you can see now does not look terrible anymore. Now I was left that small wrinkle you could see. When I sanded it, I very quickly had a white line. Most decals, even the coloured ones, have a sort of a white undercoat on them. So if you sand them too hard, you'll start to see white. You don't want that, obviously. On this one I had that white line where that crease was, so I've just touched that in with a bit of blue paint. And the blue paint I've used for that, by a very happy coincidence, this colour here matches these decals rather well. It's Mr. Colour C326, which is blue FS15004, sorry, 044, which is meant for Thunderbirds, USAF Thunderbirds. Please focus, there we go. I've just brushed a little touch of that on very carefully with a fine brush, and that's matched in really rather nicely. And then on the end of this raised trunking detail, the decal had split. 9 times out of 10 that is going to happen, so you really don't give yourself too much grief if your decal splits there. And again, I've just touched that in with a brush and a little touch of Tamiya XF2 flat and white. Done. And everything's been given a little rub. Any areas that I thought were a touch rough or anything else, I've given them a little flatten down. And every single decal and the area around it has been rubbed back with that Trizact. So any of those sort of strange irregularities you get where your decal solutions and the glues and things from the decals leave weird marks all over your paint finish, that's all been taken off. None of that remains. And I have, as I say, by sanding across this, started the process of blending these decals into the surface finish. The next step from here to complete the decaling process is another coat of gloss, and I'm going to use X22 as I tend to do. This is an olden days 23mm Tamiya pot, and what I tend to do, I buy a new pot of X22, this one is empty, and when this is nearly gone, I tip away what remains and I put the whole jar straight in here. I then fill this jar with Mr. Colour Thinner. This stuff is just regular Mr. Colour Thinner. It's not the retarded type levelling thinner, and it's not the fast type. This is the standard Mr. Colour Thinner. So I'll fill that 10ml pot back up, give it a good shake, and that'll collect all the sort of dregs of X22 that are stuck to the sides of the bottle and the cap, and then I dump that wholesale into here. So what I have in my 23ml jar straight away is a 50-50 mixture of X22 and Mr. Colour Thinners. I then clean out these jars, and these can be used for mixing other colours, special colours, whatever you need. They're quite handy to keep hold of. And do keep hold of them, because if you ever find yourself in a position where you have to buy one to mix a special colour, it will cost you almost as much as a full one does. So keep hold of them. So as you can see, this is quite thin already. It's thin 50-50 straight from the get-go, and I will then thin that when I put it in the airbrush. In this case, probably about 50-50 again. So it is a very, very thin mix of this clear coat. It is probably, as a minimum, I'd say it's probably about 70% thinners when I do stuff like this. And all I'm going to do is, with that very thin clear, put probably 2 coats over the areas of the model I've sanded. In practice, with the model being as small as it is, I'm just going to coat the whole thing. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment when I've done it. And here we are then, a few minutes later, with another coat of gloss on the model. And yes, it is very shiny now. That shine will dull back some as it dries off properly. But I have to say, doesn't the Mosquito look gorgeous in a gloss finish? Pity it's incredibly unrealistic, but it looks very nice. So here we are, another coat of gloss, angling it so you can see. And we've sealed these decals in nicely, properly. They've got a nice hard shell of paint over the top of them. When this is dry, I will sand it again, and that extra depth of paint will allow me to blend the edges of these decals even further. They are still very visible at this point, I think you'll agree, but subsequent coats of, if you wanted to, you could completely hide the edge of these decals by building up subsequent layers of clear and sanding them back. Just keep sanding them back between coats, and eventually you'll get to a point where the finish becomes level and you won't be able to discern the edge of the decals anymore. I don't wish or need to do that with this model because the addition of flat coat later on will hide the decals well enough for what I need. So that's it for now, and the model now needs to be set aside and left alone for a good couple of days to let this completely harden. And I say that because using these type of paints, or at least using them with lacquer thinners, you do get this effect where this layer of paint will have slightly softened the ones underneath it and reactivated them to a degree. So actually you do need to leave it, it's touch dry now. See, I wouldn't want to hold it, but I can touch it, but I need that to cure, and being cured is quite different from being dry. So this is flashed off and dry enough to touch, but I need it to cure all the way through so that subsequent coats don't cause me problems. So the model will be set aside to dry for a few days, and we'll pick it up again in the next episode where I'll rub the model all down again, and then we'll probably put some wash in a few places and apply a flat coat, and hopefully there'll even be time in that episode to bring in all the final parts, get them all painted and maybe even fitted and finished, maybe, not sure. Might need another 2 episodes rather than just 1, but we'll see. Anyway, apologies for the big delay between the last episode and this one. I'll try to make it shorter between this one and the next one, and hopefully those of you that are following along haven't just given up on me and finished your models anyway or thrown them in the trash. So thanks very much for watching, look forward to seeing you in the next episode, and with all that said, it only remains for me to say, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.